Hi friends, welcome back to Digitalk. In this session, I am going to give you an overview of what are services in Kubernetes. So this is one of the core component in the Kubernetes, okay, and which participate in the coordination between the different components of your Kubernetes, along with the traffic that we received inside the Kubernetes cluster from the outside. Okay, so you can say about the internal traffic and also the external traffic. Okay, so what we know about the Kubernetes, and that what we have learned in the previous session, is that Kubernetes is a distributed system. Okay, where we have a multiple nodes, right? We have a master node, we have a worker node, where our Docker or we can say some containerized system is engine is running, and then on top of that we have multiple containers, right? So that means it is a distributed system. And then in a distributed system, you need a multiple component for the coordination. Okay, so that your work can be done easily. Okay, so all these component, whatever we have either in the master node or in the worker node, they communicate with each other, and the applications that we deploy inside the containers that we can access from the outer world, right? So to allow your application to access from the external system, or you can say from the external network, okay, within the Kubernetes cluster, along with that, to allow the communication between the different components of the Kubernetes cluster, we use the services. Okay, so whether it is an internal communication between the containers, or whether it is a user who is going to access your application which is deployed inside your Kubernetes cluster. In both cases, we use the services. So a Kubernetes service enable consistent communication between pods within the cluster, allowing them to interact seamlessly. So that means if we have a multiple machines, or you can say the multiple worker nodes where we have a multiple pods are running, okay, and inside the pod we have a multiple containers are running. So to allow the communication between all the pods and all the containers, we define the services. Okay, and along with that, for external users accessing an application, a service function as a gateway, routing incoming requests into the cluster so users can connect to the application reliably. So that means if we have deployed some applications inside the Kubernetes cluster and some user wanted to access that services from the outside, okay, maybe from the outside network of the Kubernetes cluster, okay, then we have to create a service. For example, in the traditional environment, what we do, we deploy the application on the servers, and then we have a web server, and along with that, sometimes we use the front end load balancers as well. Okay, and then user can access the application with the help of DNS of your load balancer. Right. So in that case, if some users are going to access their applications from the outside of network, which is not in your Kubernetes network, okay, then we define the services, and then with the help of services, your clients can access the applications which we have deployed in the Kubernetes cluster. So this is the high level overview of services. What exactly is the services? So now we have a different kind of a services which allow the communication between your internal pods, or which allow the communication from the outer world. Okay, so let us suppose that we have a Kubernetes cluster again, okay, where you have a master node on machine A, and then you have a multiple worker node where you have multiple containers and pods are running. Okay, then to allow the communication between the different pods. So this is a completely an internal communication between your Kubernetes cluster. Right. So for that, we have a cluster IP. So this is the default type of services in Kubernetes. So this is one of the thing that you have to notice in that case is the default service in the Kubernetes are cluster IP. It exposes the services on an internal IP address that is only accessible within the cluster. It allows communication between pods within the same cluster while keeping them isolated from external traffic. Okay. So this cluster IP services doesn't have any relation with the outer world of traffic. Okay. It only allow or expose your different pods to communicate with each other inside the Kubernetes cluster. Okay. Now, second is node port. So, in addition to cluster IP, a node port service exposes the services on a static port on each node of the cluster. This type of service allows external traffic to reach the service by accessing any node's IP address on the specified port. Right. So now what we know about the containers is that our applications run inside the container. Okay. For example, we have a web server Nginx, which is running inside a particular pod, or you can say inside the containers, which is there inside the pod. Okay. On the port 80. Now this container is running inside the pod, and this pod is inside our Kubernetes cluster. Now, suppose that you wanted to access the application which is deployed in your web server. Okay, so now because port 80 is completely inside your container in the Kubernetes cluster, to access that service from the outer world, for example, even from your local system as well. Okay, for example, you have done a setup of your Kubernetes in the local system, okay, which has a local default IP address, which we say as a local host. Right. Now, if suppose that you have configured the Kubernetes in your local machine, okay, where you have a pod with a container where your web server is running on port 80. Now, if you would like to access your web server from your local outside network, that means from your local PC. Okay, so for that you have to enable the node port. Okay, that means if you would like to access the services outside the cluster, then you have to define the node port. Okay, so this type of service allow external traffic to reach the service by accessing any node's IP address on the specified port. So in that case, what you can do, you can use the IP address of any of the pod, and by giving the port which you have specified in the node port, you can access the service which you have deployed inside the port. Okay, so this I will show you with a small example. Okay, however, we have a different ways for setup this kind of a services. Okay, I will show you one demo as well. Okay, how to access these services. Third is the load balancer. This is one of the most common type of deployment that we do in the production. Okay, we have a multiple backend servers where we have a multiple applications are running, and then for the high availability, load balancing, and then different kind of stuff like for failover, we use the load balancer in front. So if you have a load balancer in front, okay, then what you can do, you have to define a service called load balancer. Okay, so this is mostly used in the managed Kubernetes setup where this Kubernetes is set up in some of the cloud solutions like from the Amazon or maybe Oracle or maybe some other multiple cloud service providers are there. They are providing the managed Kubernetes services. So in specifically in that case, we create the load balancer service, and when we create the load balancer service, it automatically assign a public IP to your cluster. Okay, so with the help of that public IP, we can access the services which is deployed in the multiple pod or containers in the backend. Okay, and now the external name. So suppose that sometime you may need the access of some services which is running outside the cluster from your pod. Okay, for example, you may have a database running in your some of your pods or containers. Okay, and then it has to reach to some outside URL or outside services to check for the updates. Okay, so in that case, you need the traffic, or you can say you need the communication in the reverse order. That means from your Kubernetes cluster to the outside world. Okay, so in that scenario, we define the services with which is defined as external name, so that your the applications which is running inside your pod or a containers can access the services which is running outside your containers, or you can say outside your Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so there could be a chances that you may have an integration with the on-premise application, or maybe you have an integration with some other cloud applications. So in that case, you have to define it as an external name. So these are the high-level overview of the four different kind of a services that we have in Kubernetes that we can create. Okay, and out of that, the cluster IP is the default one, which is used for the internal communication between your different pods and your containers. Okay, so let me show you a demo. Okay, and let me cover what I'm going to cover in this particular demo. Okay, so I have a local setup of the Kubernetes in my local system. So I'm going to create a deployment. Okay, and this deployment I am going to create an image of a Nginx web server. Okay, which will be running on port 80, which is the default port. Okay, so this is the command that will create a deployment with the name of web server and with the image of Nginx web server. Okay, so once it is created, we have to access the web server, okay, from the outer network. That means outer from the Kubernetes cluster. So for that, we have to expose this deployment as a service, and this is a command, okay, where we are going to expose this deployment as a service and on the node port, because we are going to access this web server from the outside network of the Kubernetes cluster. So I have to define the type as node port. Okay, and the port number will be 80. So this is the command that we use to expose the deployment, okay, which we have created as a service. Okay, and then you can check the status of service, and then you can run the port forward. So this is the way we have to define the rule if you would like to access service from your local system. Okay, which is to access the service which is running inside your Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so the command is kubectl port -forward. service, because we have going to access with the help of service, slash name of the service is the name of the service that we have given. And then this is the port where our Nginx server is running inside the container, port 80. And from local system, we are going to access it on the port 7090. Okay, so this is a complete command that where we define the port forward. So again, based on the kind of the type that you are going to use, that means the type of service that we are going to use. Okay, there are different ways for accessing the applications which is running inside your container. Okay, this is one of the simplest way how we can access the application with the help of port forwarding. But apart from that, there are many other ways as well, which we will cover in detail in our course that we are going to launch in Udemy. Okay, soon. So let me execute the demo. Okay, so I don't need to start my Kubernetes cluster local because it is up and running. So let me show you. Okay, so my Kubernetes cluster is up and running. So now I am going to create a deployment with the name of web-server, which will create the Nginx image. So let me run it. Let me copy it properly. Okay, so let me create it. Now you can see that the deployment image has been created. Okay, and now uh, let me create the service as well. This is the command which is going to expose this deployment as a service on the node port. Let me run it. You can see the service also created. Okay, and if you would like to check the status, then you can check get pods, and this will give you the pod which has been created. So this is the deployment name, and based on this deployment name, it has created this particular pod, right? And similarly, you can check the status of services as well. Let me services. So this is a command that we have ran to create the service with the name of web-server. So now you can see that this service also created, and the type of this node port, because we have given the type as node port, right? This is the internal cluster IP has been assigned. There is no external IP because this is applicable if we have the service as load balancer. Then it will assign a public IP here. Okay, now it is listening on the port 80, right? So now we have to make a forward rule to access this particular web server from our local system. So now I am going to access this Nginx web server from my local system, and this Nginx is running inside the Kubernetes cluster, right? So I have to make a port forward rule. So what I am going to do, I will access from my local system on port 7090, and when I will hit the URL with this particular port, it will forward the request via this service on the port 80 to the web server which is running inside this particular Docker container. Okay, or you can say inside the Kubernetes pod. So let me create the rule. Now you can see that forwarding from this localhost 7092 port 80. Okay, from this service. So now to access it from the local system, I have to give the port 7090 localhost and then 7090. Okay, now you can see that we can able to access the Nginx. So now this web server, let me explain you again. So this web server, what we have done, we have created a deployment with the name of web server, and inside this deployment, we have created an image of Nginx server, right? So when we executed this deployment, it has created a pod, right? This is a pod which has been created. Okay, and after that we have created the service. Okay, and after creating the service, we have specified the port forward rule, and then we can able to access the service. Now I will show you how you can move inside the pod, or how you can move inside the container. So now if I explain it again, what we have done, we have created a pod. Inside that pod, we have a container is running. So this is our pod, right? And inside this pod, we have a container, right? Because we know that pod is a collection of multiple containers. So here we have a one container is running inside this particular pod. So we can navigate inside this particular pod, and we can navigate inside the container which is running inside this particular pod, right? So this is very useful when we are in a professional environment. Then we have to move inside the container where we have a multiple services are running, like look for some configuration files or maybe look for logs if it is there inside the containers. So we have to switch between the pods and the containers as well, right, from the command line, right? So let me show you how you can move inside your pod or inside your containers as well. Okay. So very first thing, you have to first get the name of your pod with the help of qctl get pods command, which I have already explained to you. This is the command qctl get pods, and with the help of that, we can able to get our pod name, right? And now to go inside this particular pod, this is the command kubectl exec hyphen it, the name of your pod hyphen hyphen slash bin hyphen slash sh. So let me take my pod name from here and let me replace it here, right? So now with the help of this command, I can able to switch between my pod. Now you can see that I am at the root prompt and these are different files and directories which is specifically inside this particular pod. Right. So now what I have this inside this pod, I have a container where my web server is running. Nginx web server is running. So now how to move inside that particular container, which is inside this particular pod. Okay. So for that, you need to describe this pod. Okay. So that you can get the complete container details, which is running inside this particular pod. So let me describe this pod. Okay. Let me come exit from this pod cell. Right. Now you can see that when we ran this command, okay, it is giving you the complete detail of the container which is running inside the pod. Okay, so now let me show you. This is the containers section, and here it will list all of the containers which is there inside this particular pod. So the name of container is Nginx in our case, right? So let me take the command. So what we have to do, we have to run this command, same command which we have ran for to go inside the pod, and then you have to give hyphen c and the name of your container, and then same hyphen hyphen slash bin then slash sh. This is the cell. Okay, so now let me change the name of our pod here, and let me take this command, and let me go here and let me run this command. Okay, let me copy it again. Okay, now you can see that we are at the root prompt. So now we are inside the particular container. Okay, so this is the way how we can set up the deployment and service, how we can access the service from the outer side of the cluster with the help of port forwarding. Okay, and then how we can navigate between the pods and then containers. And now if you would like to clear the setup that you have done for the testing purpose, for that you can run the command qctl delete deployment and the name of your deployment. And similarly, you can run qctl delete service and the name of your service, right? So what we have done so far, we have created a deployment, and along with that we have created a service. So with the help of that, we have cleared our environment. This is very important when you are working on a demo for some local environment. So whatever the setup that you have done, you have to clean that one to free up the resources. So make sure to follow cleanup when you are done with the exercises. Okay, so this is done. So stay tuned for the next video. Thank you.